Our next speaker, we had a session at one of our network days on social media, and we had a panel session, and it was quite well received. So we put the topic again on the agenda. Today we have Tommy Tudhope. Tommy is one of Australia's most recognised social media strategists. He pioneered the use of social media and online activism in Australian politics through his work with Michael Turnbull as Cabinet Minister, Leader of the Opposition and Member for Wentworth. During his time with Malcolm, the online presence was regarded as best practice and was officially recognised by the Australian Internet Industry Association. Tommy has spent time abroad with Republicans and Democrats on digital outreach and online activism. Prior to joining SR7, Tommy worked at Sky News as a digital producer, specialising in current affairs, business and technology. Tommy has extensive experience managing small and large social media campaigns that seek to raise awareness, drive sales and increase exposure. Moreover, Tommy often conducts social media workshops that seek to educate a variety of stakeholders on social media best practice, how to handle dissent and what social media measurement can do for an organisation. He regularly appears as a commentator across all TV networks on a variety of issues, including social networking, politics and the media. Tommy is also a regular contributor to opinion sites The Drum and The Punch. If everyone can welcome Tommy.
So I'm going to talk about social media today. Some of it might be new to you, some of it might be old, so hopefully you'll be able to take away a few lessons about the importance of social media, how it relates to governance issues, maybe things you can take back to your local council, local government areas. Personally, having had a background in politics, I think of any area that social media is most applicable to, it's actually local government, more so than state government or federal government. I think it's far easier to communicate ideas around service delivery than it is to communicate ideas around public policy. I think you have to look at the debate that goes on social media platforms like Twitter just to see how difficult it is to have some of these conversations. But when it comes to more detailed service delivery issues, I think this is where the real benefit is for the community. The community gets some tangible benefits from it. I think it's far easier for local governments to actually communicate on those sort of mediums. So I'll cover off a whole variety of different things. I'll also cover some stuff around social media policies, if you haven't got them in place or looking to change them. Social media policies are things that probably should be updated quite often. And on a more personal note, I'll also cover off some tips around LinkedIn and managing your personal profile for those who also might be interested in that. So my background was mainly true, I think. So I do some work in the local government space, mainly around social media policy development and also helping some councils develop social media presence. My experience is that most councils are doing stuff online. Some are more advanced than others. It usually depends on the general manager or the communications manager, how far along they are in that path. And I'll go through some case studies of some of the councils that I've found over the last couple of weeks who are doing some interesting things. So a little bit about the social media landscape that we're now operating in. Australia's probably got the most developed social media demographic. In terms of the population using online tools, they're very active. And in fact, women are now the most active users of social media in Australia. And there's a bit of a misconception that social media tools and things like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram are just tools for young people. In fact, the biggest demographic who use these tools are actually women who are aged between 30 and 45. So In terms of a target market for a local government, I think this is particularly applicable. So in terms of your community, in terms of ratepayers, they're probably most likely going to be on social media, and they're most likely going to be on Facebook, and then LinkedIn or Twitter as well. And this shows a little bit more about the age demographic. So it's slowly moving away from the 17 to 24 market, and the majority of users are now moving towards the 30 to 45 and even older. And if you consider that if you exclude people who are above 70 or below 13 who probably don't have a social media presence or aren't that online active, you're essentially looking at the majority of the population are in some way, shape or form digesting information through social media. Now it might just be through mainstream news outlets, or they could have a more active presence on things like Facebook or Twitter. So what are the possibilities for local government? I think they are, as I said at the start, they're enormous and very varied. There are lots of different potentials to do different things and quite innovative. But for me, I think the biggest area is obviously in the service delivery area. Some councils doing a lot of work promoting events, so there's also an awareness avenue. But there's also an issue around governance mitigating against risk and due diligence that can be done online. So here are some case studies that I've found over the last couple of weeks that might give you some examples of what's actually out there in the social media landscape. They're mostly from New South Wales, so maybe some people from the room are from these councils, and by all means, if anybody wants to step in and ask a question throughout, happy to be interrupted if anyone wants to disagree or add some more additional information. So the first council that I found is Mosman Council. And as you can see from the right-hand side, that far image, their social media presence is quite extensive. They've got multiple Twitter accounts, multiple Facebook pages, they're on YouTube, Flickr, and they've also got a blog. So this is a bit of a demonstration how you can have multiple social media presences across multiple different platforms. Now, for some people, that's a bridge too far. They do too much social media too quickly, whereas the better way to do it, or the better approach, is to start out small to master one platform and then move to another. But Mosman's councils has developed over a period of time, and it's quite extensive and it's quite successful. And it basically tries to provide as many real-time updates as possible about council activities, responds to questions, and it's quite clearly appropriately resourced. I'll cover some resourcing issues a little bit later on, but social media is essentially something that should be a full-time job within the local government area. So Pibwater Council takes a different view on social media. They tend to use it more as a tourist hub to promote local events and local icons and local activities. And it's mainly done through rich media purposes, so things like videos, images, and any sort of combination of those sort of things, but it is quite successful. So this one's from South Australia, Sydney Salisbury, and this is a campaign they conducted on Pinterest. I'm not sure if most people are familiar with Pinterest. It's basically an online pin board. I think it's very difficult to use in local government. It's a good example of how they used it. What they basically did is they had a 30th anniversary of a particular icon in the council, and they encouraged people to collate images from dating back over those 30 years of that event and that of the playground, collated the stories across those 30 years. And it was a really unique way to create a narrative that coupled with an event and also had a lot of buy-in from the community. So the community was submitting events and photos. So the onus on who was producing all the content was significantly decreased. Queanbeyan Council, and I think with social media, as you can see with many different councils, especially when it comes to bushfires and floods, social media is now a key avenue for awareness and information. The police often rely on updates from the council or work with the councils to provide real-time updates, and then in turn, media outlets often rely on information that's put out on social media to broadcast their own updates and keep their own information up to date. So I think Queanbeyan Council recently in the floods is a good example that social media is important and how you can actually keep those updates to a community as regular as possible. Lane Cove Council, I think this is a bit of a difficult area with transactions. Social media is moving to that space now where people are performing transactions through social media sites. It's mainly through Facebook, so it could mean purchasing a particular item, but it also could mean paying a bill. Now this area is only in its infancy, but I think over the next couple of years we'll see people moving away from paying bills and paying things online through websites, through social media. It is an ever-expanding area. It's already happening through iPhone apps, so I think that seamless process is an emerging area. And a lot of the councils who already have these particular apps are tapping into that transactional area. Now, whether this is just alerting people to, or giving them an option to pay a bill, or in this case with Lane Cove Council, what they've done is they provide a whole range of information about what is happening in the council around food and dining, around parking events, and even parking exploration as well, which is an interesting area. And this is the last case study I've got. So this one from no one from South Australia. This is probably more applicable for internal purposes, or if you're a communications manager or a general manager or a council. I found a lot of general managers are now looking to promote themselves or looking to use their personal profile as an avenue to promote the council. And this general manager of this council often puts out regular YouTube videos about what's happening in the council, but he also does it on an internal mechanism as well. So providing internal staff with an update, put a YouTube video out there and tell them about new governance issues or tell them about a new policy that the council's released and how it might apply to the local council or local staff. So it's an interesting way of doing things. I don't think it's all that successful. I think if you're sending around a video, it takes half an hour to create a video and it's only going to 12 staff members. I'm not sure there's the exact balance there in terms of producing a video rather than just sending an email, but in this case he's quite comfortable with the medium and it's an innovative way of doing things, so I don't see why not. So I'll go into a little bit more depth now about creating a social media strategy. I think if you're working in the governance area or the general manager's developing a strategy or the communications manager's developing a strategy, this is something you probably going to have to be intimately involved in to mitigate against risk and also ensure that the strategy is properly developed and properly executed, because social media has a tendency to go wrong some of the time. It's just the nature of the medium. Things don't always go to plan. It can be potentially hostile, especially on Twitter. I think it's a very hostile medium, so a strategy is an important way to get things underway. These are the key drivers of what should develop a social media strategy. So exactly, do you need one? Some councils may wish to decide they don't actually need social media. That might be the case for a regional council. If you're not comfortable doing it, I don't think you should do it until you are comfortable. There is a bit of a tendency to do social media too quickly, and I think if a council's not comfortable doing it, they shouldn't do it until a time when they are comfortable, whether it's a resourcing, whether they think they've got enough content to put out there, or it can be properly managed over a period of time. Then after that, you've got to decide which platforms or where you're actually going to promote most of the time. I think in most cases that's probably going to be Facebook. It's got the biggest audience and the most engaged audience. And then after that, what are you actually going to communicate? Are you just going to promote events? Or are you going to promote awareness? Or are you going to just talk about local service delivery or local maintenance issues, whatever it is? And then whom? So making sure you're actually communicating with a group of people rather than just broadcasting out to nobody. So further towards the development phase, these are the key components that you will need to consider when developing a social media strategy if it's not already in place. So planning, obviously, engage, measure and listen. So I'll come to some measurement tools in a moment as well. So there is a bit of a tendency or a difficulty in measuring social media. You might have a Facebook page that's got 1,000 likes, so you might have 100 Twitter followers, but what does it actually mean? Are you actually getting any real outcome from that? Is it actually serving any purpose, or are you just basically talking to no one? So these are the different objectives or the different types of measurement that you may wish to use when it comes to social media. Particularly around audience reach and results, I think are important, and then you can start getting a bit more of a handle, a bit more of a grip on actually is there a return on investment? Is it actually worthwhile having one staff member, or should we cut it back? Or do we think it's actually working quite successful that we can expand it and consider more profiles and more of a resourcing? And then digging a little bit deeper into the measurement, this is the sort of things we start to look for over a period of time after social media strategy has been implemented and developed. So what things like awareness, mainstream media connection, so information that's put out on social media, is that being picked up by local papers or is it enhancing their relationship with local papers? Follows, likes and interactions, so people who are on those different profiles, actually, what's that actually going to mean? Are they actually local council? Are they actually in the local government area? Can they be tracked? Are we benefiting them in some way? And then against the costs. So if we're spending X amount of money on a particular staff member, are we getting a return? You know, if you have I'll come to an example about this now. So here are some of the social media measurement tools that you can use. There are lots of them out there. Some of them are free and some of them are paid. I think it's probably a mandatory consideration to have a social media listening tool. You might want to go for a free one first and then expand to a paid one. But simple things like TweetDeck, which is this one on the left-hand side, will give you return all the mentions on a particular search word. So if you just want to search Pittwater Council on Twitter, you can set up a nice little column in TweetDeck and it will return you every single mention of that council. And then you can expand that into more keywords or users or individuals or events or whatever it may be. That way you can at least track the conversation. I think this is probably particularly relevant to the social media crisis if something goes wrong. That way you can at least track the activity online and see what the sentiment or the awareness is around that issue. Personally, I think some of the paid social media tools probably aren't worth the investment. If you've only got a few social media profiles, maybe you've only got a Facebook page and a Twitter profile, I wouldn't bother spending money on a paid service. It's pretty expensive and you're not going to get a return for the expense. Does anybody here use a paid social media listening service in their council? So crisis management, I think it's an important part of local government and governance when you're looking after social media or if you're overseeing social media management. As I said previously, things can go wrong online and they can go wrong very quickly and they can have long-term damage. And usually what will happen, I think the mediums tend to move so quickly and most things that go wrong usually happen on Twitter, or they start on Facebook and they migrate to Twitter because most of the media is on Twitter and that's where they amplify their conversation or amplify their own media coverage or drive people back to their own media stories. So, you know, a lot of the time it's all about getting peak outrage, so who can be most outraged about something the quickest, and then things usually move on within a 12 to 24 hour period, but I think in the first 12 hours is probably the key. Now, in a local government arena, the crisis might vary. It might actually be an emergency management issue, so it could be a flood or a fire, or it could be an issue with the general manager who's been caught doing something, but it's worth tracking how these things play out online, and especially as they relate to your own social media presence. And this is one way in which you can manage a social media crisis. I don't think every council, or depending on the profile you have, not everybody needs to have a onerous social media crisis plan that plans out every minute or hour that you're going to manage something, but I think it's probably good to have some small steps in place that you know that you can fall back on if something does go wrong and how you might seek to handle these issues. So I think it's probably most important at the end of something that's happened to get some sort of reporting mechanism in place to identify what exactly happened online, how many mentions there were on Twitter or on Facebook, what was the reaction, did you lose fans, did you gain fans, what was the overall sentiment, and how did this reflect on the council, and that way moving forward you can, for next time, at least see what happened and how it can be managed in the future. So developing a social media campaign. Now a campaign can take a whole different range of features or facets. It doesn't need to be necessarily around a particular event. You might seek to do a social media campaign that raises awareness about a particular change to a road or a particular oval or something like that. And it might be something that is undertaken over 6 months on a particular social media site. I think for most of the councils that I've seen who are using social media, they are tending to migrate this way, to use social platforms like Facebook and like Twitter as educational tools. and to promote awareness about changes in the local government area. So this is probably a little bit more of a in-depth explanation about how you might go about executing a social media campaign. I can provide everybody with the slides and all these links and graphs are hyperlinked with a little bit more information about it if you'd like to read further. But this is basically a step-by-step process about how you would actually go about managing a social media campaign. Doesn't need to be onerous, doesn't need to be hugely extensive, it can just be very small scale, but at least by doing a set campaign where you've actually got some clear objectives, you know what the plan is, you know who you're trying to reach and what message is, you might be able to actually measure the effectiveness of how effective social media is compared to a newsletter drop or a letterbox drop or an ad in the paper. That way you can say, well, you know, we conducted a campaign on Facebook, we reached X amount of people, we spent this amount of advertising, we got this return, and this was some of the outcomes that we thought worked on social media. And you might come at the end, or you might come to the conclusion that social media was a waste of time, and it is in some circumstances, but at least you're actually going to be able to get some sort of measurable indication of what works and what doesn't work, rather than just putting stuff out on social media and wondering if it's having any effect or not. And this is a little bit of a timeline that you might wish to use. So it breaks down all the different steps around building good content, what sort of content that can be, who's going to update it, and how effective it's going to be, and who you actually are trying to reach, and also the platforms. So obviously there are new social media platforms coming online all the time, like Instagram and Pinterest and a few others. But I think for local government purposes, it's probably best to focus on Facebook and Twitter. That's where the audience is most likely going to be for you. So after you've done a campaign, or after you've done some extensive work on social media, I think you probably want to get to a point where you're actually getting some sort of value out of the output that you're putting on social media, whether it's a staff or whether it's actually time and effort. So when it comes to measuring digital value or the value of social media tools, I think these are some of the components you're looking for, not just awareness, but also relationship enhancement. And Twitter's a great way to enhance relationships with local media. It's a great way to promote stories. It's a great way to get stories in local papers at lower cost by liaising with editors or journalists who might have a social media presence. It's also a good way of complementing stories after the fact that they've been published, or further promoting them, or sharing them around. And there's also some internal benefits. You might be using tools like Yammer to communicate internally. I think there are some benefits around social media, increasing the rate of communication, the speed of communication for internal purposes. And more specifically for social media, some of the digital benefits or some of the cost benefits we're looking at would be around reach, preference and action. So the volume of visitors, particular share of voice in the local government area, the traction, whether that message was successful, and then also things like sentiment, whether it was positive or negative, whether it was a complete waste of time, whether there's actually some value in it. So I'll deal with more specifically now with some governance and some policy issues you might be interested in. So social media policy, I'm assuming each of your councils has got one in place. The councils that I've worked with, I've found a lot of them have taken considerable time to put a policy in place, up to 12 to 18 months to put a simple policy in place, which is not uncommon for government. But for some businesses, they still don't have it in place. I don't think local government is lagging behind in this area, but a social media policy is probably the best starting point for any sort of activity online. Now, it doesn't need to be extensive. It can just be simple and short, but it should also reflect the online tools. So it reflects emerging platforms or the existing ones, but it also has to have some degree of flexibility, and it also has to protect staff. Now, some people, some businesses, some councils ban social media. I don't think that's the best avenue to go. I think there is a perception that a lot of staff members just waste time sitting on Facebook. That's true. But the reality is online tools are now so accessible by mobile devices and tablets that you're never going to stop someone using it. You know, they're going to be using it between when they go go outside for a smoke, or when they're going for a coffee, or when they're in their lunch break, they're going to be accessing these sites. I think the better way to go about it is to provide education and to promote social media so they know the risks involved, their personal brand, but they also feel comfortable that they can promote the council online and they can promote their local government area by using the tools effectively and sharing them if need be. And there should also be some deeper educational components in these policies. And I think the best thing to do is update the policy every 6 to 9 months. I'm not talking about the full update, but it should be updated in the sense that it reflects new activities online, or new platforms, or new areas of legislation. So there is a lot of work being done at the state and federal level around Privacy Act and defamation, as it particularly relates to online tools. So in terms of resourcing issues, social media can be a difficult area to resource. Whether it's done, I know some council where the general manager does all of it. It looks after the Facebook page and a Twitter page. Whereas some people have communications managers, or a media or a marketing manager looks after it. I think you've got to do whatever's comfortable for each organisation. Personally, I think it's best done with the communications manager or media manager, more so than marketing or the general manager. Social media is ultimately a communications tool. It should work, hand in glove with marketing and other components of the council. But I think the communications manager is probably going to have the best grasp of what works in terms of good content and sending a message and communicating succinctly and effectively. I think that's why they're best placed to do it. And these are some of the, if you're going to hire, or if your local government area is looking to hire a dedicated social media manager, I think these are some of the key traits you want to be looking for. Now, you probably can't see the example on the right-hand side there, but this was a case in the UK just last week or the week before, where a social media manager was terminated from their job, but this manager just happened to set up all the different profiles and kept all the passwords. So after they left, they continued to update all the pages, which had a couple 100,000 fans with some quite unsavoury messages. So probably important that if you're managing social media within your organisation or your local government area, to make sure a few people know the passwords, and that's be covered off. But these are some of the, communications, obviously the key one that I touched on before, but also you need some sort of technical know-how as well, to be a programmer or an IT whiz, but having some sort of in-depth knowledge about how these platforms mechanically work is an added benefit for a good social media manager. So, and building on those sort of traits, tone really is a key driver of success online. Being casual, being conversational, being friendly, and not being overly bureaucratic is the best way to talk online. You don't want a social media profile that is completely slang, but you don't want to be laden with bureaucratic jargon either. So it is a subtle feature, but usually the organisations or the councils that use it most effectively are the ones that engage in some sort of communal style conversation, are engaging with the audience. So over time, ultimately, if you've got a good social media manager and a good policy in place and a good strategy in place, you'll be able to effectively build an online community that talks about the local area, that talks about local events, that can promote the council, that can provide good feedback, and then you can get good insight into what works, what doesn't work, what interests of the community have. That can give you some really good feedback about what's going on in your local area, can help shape future campaigns, future events, and informed decision making that the council might undertake. This takes time. Could be a matter of up to a year, up to 2 years, but once your social media profile has been fully developed and you're putting out good content on a regular basis, it's moderated, it's monitored, I think you're going to get to that stage where your online community is going to be very, very effective and going to provide a lot of benefits to the local area. So these are some of the reasons why social media might not work, and there are plenty of them, and it doesn't always work. It's the nature of the medium that it's always changing, and lots of different things don't work for lots of different reasons, and there are plenty of examples each week of people who do it wrong. But I think it's important at least to try things, and even if they do go wrong, you can go back and try again and adapt and get a better sort of type of communication or type of different language. But definitely from the government's point of view, I think delegating social media to the wrong person can have severe ramifications. Making sure it's properly managed and properly resourced. And if you don't think it can be resourced properly, I wouldn't engage with it until you think it can be. You know, you can just monitor social media to pick up keywords and mentions. You can find out what's online. You know, and if you think it's not relevant or it's not going to be applicable enough, I wouldn't do it just for the sake of doing it. I think that's a mistake some people make. So criticism is a integral part of social media. There's a critic waiting behind every online click, and they tend to be very boisterous and very determined and very motivated, or trolls by another word. It's definitely a huge problem online, and it's definitely more of a problem on Twitter than it is on Facebook. But the easiest way to mitigate against this is through good moderation and good monitoring, and also by starting our social media presence that is community-based. If it's just a broadcast tool, or if the community thinks it's not being properly managed or moderated, it's going to be more likely that criticism is going to be levelled towards the council. If it's not, if there's a lack of responsiveness there, that's also going to motivate people to continue to hurl abuse or hurl criticism. There is moderation and monitoring as well. You can block people, you can delete them from Facebook pages. They are good steps in and of themselves, but they're not ultimately going to cure a problem of online criticism. So again, it goes back to creating that harmonious community as often as you can. So on a more personal level, I think it's for those of you who are interested in your own personal brand online. I've got some easy ways to build your own personal profile and build your own online footprint that might help you in terms of thought leadership issues, on building connections or building a niche. So obviously most of you have got particular areas of specialty. Now these conversations around that area of specialty are definitely happening online. Where they're happening is up to you to find them. I think most of the time they're probably happening on Twitter or on LinkedIn. I've got some tips on LinkedIn now, I think. So LinkedIn is quite a difficult social media platform. I think most people thought it was a bit of a waste of time. It's made some changes over the last year or so that has made it more dynamic. But it is one of those platforms, if you master it, it's not just about having an online CV or a tool for recruiters to get in touch with you. I think if you manage it properly, you can find meaningful discussions on there, and you can liaise with people or connect with people who are direct relevance to your future career or might be direct relevance to offer something to the council. Now, I think the best way to do about this is through groups and discussions. So if you go through and search on LinkedIn for groups and discussions, you can find particular niche conversations. Now, it might be about local council governance, or it might be about a particular issue. Or you can go about searching people by title. So if you're looking for someone for a particular job or for a particular area of interest for the council, you can search for people based on their title or based on keywords, which is another good way to find people on LinkedIn to liaise with them and to build up a profile. The other thing to be wary of is recommendations and endorsements. Now, if you get a recommendation or endorsement on LinkedIn, it's quite good for your profile in terms of search, but I would be wary about getting people giving you a written recommendation on your LinkedIn profile. I think they, in and of themselves, they're fine, but I have seen a lot of cases, especially recently, where people have written a recommendation and it wasn't true, or it was embellished, or the person sought a recommendation so they would get one in return, and it came back to bite them in terms of the content they put up there. So it's just something to be aware of. So LinkedIn's got a number of benefits, as I touched on before. One good app that you can use is Card Munch if you've got an iPhone. So instead of having to, if you get someone's card, you can just take a photo of their card and it automatically searches for them on LinkedIn. And you can determine whether you want to connect with them or not. It's an easy way to manage it rather than having to go through and manually search people. But I always find with LinkedIn, good to search for before meeting or after meeting, and if it's of particular relevance to you, you can touch base with them on LinkedIn after a meeting and say, you know, nice to meet you or connect with you if they're of particular relevance to you. And to finish up, before I take some questions, as I said at the start, I think local government has the best opportunity to use social media, especially around service delivery. There are lots of ways to be really innovative, use tools like Facebook and Twitter and iPhone apps to reach your community and to engage with them. And if you've got a good policy in place and a good strategy, it can be very, very successful over a long period of time, and you can really get a lot of insights out of your community and a lot of benefits in terms of resourcing and from staff. But on that note, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Hi, Catherine Roaching Solutions. Just a couple of questions. First off, if somebody puts a recommendation for you on your LinkedIn site, they recommend you for some sort of skills, but you actually don't want that there, can you remove that?
Yep, so there is a mechanism to remove a recommendation or have it hidden. You just got to play with the toggle next to the actual recommendation. So I think that's the exact case that you don't want the recommendation that someone's provided to you. It's unsolicited, and it's of the person might have a dodgy background or something like that. So
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'll do that one tonight. And the other question I thought, well, the other day I'm on Tweets and it came up for a particular council, and it was a journo, and they were asking the council some question. I just found it then. Basically, they were asking a response from the council to their petition about safe cycleways. I was in a particular area, I won't name the council.
Yep.
But the council came back and said, you know, we're working on that response. In future, please send inquiries to our media officers, email media at blah, 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 the council address. And then they started getting, following from that, from other people, tweets in relation to definitely don't refer people from Twitter to email, poor social etiquette, and it went on from there.
Yep.
I just thought that's probably a good one to talk about.
Yeah, I think there are probably, you know, I'm guilty of myself, a lot of people who have particular rules about how social media should be used. Yeah, you know, sure, that's not ideal. There's nothing wrong with it though. I think a better way to do it would be through the direct message function, just to send them a direct message saying, yeah, we'll be in touch by email rather than have a long form public conversation. I think that's an easy way of dealing with things. But I think once you organically start using social media and you develop a feel for how it works, I think those things should actually become apparent to you how you probably communicate. Now, some people do it. Some people start on social media and think they should be really conversational. Other people think, oh, I shouldn't respond to that, I'm going to get in trouble. There's probably some sort of happy medium in between. And I think you've got to be really careful with journalists. You know, they all use social media. They live on social media. They get stories from social media. I think you've got to be really wary about how you communicate with them. You know, I think, you know, I always used to tell politicians, you've got plenty of avenues to communicate with journalists. Social media probably doesn't need to be another one because it's so public. I think it's good that you have a media office in the council that uses social media and publishes stuff. But there's something wrong with having that traditional relationship that's complemented by social media rather than translating between one and the other. But it's a difficult area to master. There's lots of problems and lots of issues that can arise. But just one of those things, it's not always going to go right because with using it intuitively, using it all the time, you're going to get a good feel of how it works and what is best for your council, what's best for the staff. Any other questions?
Oh, hi Tommy, Ian Halo, Lane Cove Council. I've spoken to a few people about social media who started social media, and a lot of councils had to shut things down because of the comments that are put on that they haven't been able to manage. Just wanted to know your thoughts on, you talked about service provision for councils, but what would your recommendations be for councils trying to, I suppose, communicate to the community in that space, but want to avoid those situations where they had to shut down blogs and Twitter accounts because of the comments that they got that were unsolicited and they couldn't control?
Yeah, I think it would be. I think it really depends on how you choose to use each individual social media platform. You are going to get a lot of unsolicited comments. Some of them might be offensive, some of them might be completely off topic, but that's the nature of the medium. But I think, you know, if I was Lane Cove Council and I wanted to start a Facebook page that was purely about parks, recreation, oval management, I would persist in promoting that, and I would communicate with people as regularly as often as possible. So say someone posted a comment on the page saying, oh, you know, I got a parking fine, I think I should be let off. It's completely unrelated to ovals or parks. But if you quickly respond to them and say, you know, thanks for your inquiry, this page is for ovals and parks, you can find the other information here. If you do it quickly and promptly, they're going to be directed, and everybody else in that community is going to be made aware that it's a on-topic conversation medium. It's not for a council to talk about every single issue that is related to local council service delivery. I think that's the danger. It's poorly moderated, as in they're not getting responses quickly enough, and the scope of the conversation in the community is poorly defined. So, you know, you can have a broad local council or a Lane Cove Council Facebook page, and people might perceive that to be talked about everything, whereas you might just want to make it specific. Now, it's nothing wrong with having 10 Facebook pages that divide up all into different areas. That might be one way of doing it. But the community needs to know that you're in charge, that you're setting the rules and the parameters, and you only want to communicate about this particular area. And if they want to communicate about something else, they can find the relevant information here. And I think if you go along that path and have those clear community guidelines, and you remove don't remove comments, but you remove offensive comments, I think the community is going to get the sense that you're in control. This is how the page is going to work, rather than something that's a bit of a free for all.
Just on that, I mean, does that also mean that, you know, the platforms are 24 hours, that you can, you know, it might be best to say, well, we're only going to respond between 9 and 5?
Yeah, definitely. Most businesses do that. I think it's fine just to say, you know, our council, our Facebook page is moderated between 8:30 and 5:30. We'll endeavour to get back to your comments within 24 hours of their being posted or something like that. And I think people are more than happy to acknowledge that and realise that their comment's not going to get an automatic response. There's going to be some sort of time lag, but at least there is someone there who's moderating the page. There is actually a real person who's behind that, and they're going to get a response in due time.
Sonia from the Division of Local Government. I was just interested to know if council's policies cover councillor use of social media, whether in their official or personal capacity.
Yeah, most don't. And it's quite a difficult area to navigate. I don't think it should. I think councils are essentially elected, and they're not actually a promotional tool of the council. So they're not council employees, technically. That's one way of looking at it. I think it's better to have that clear line of division. That councillors aren't there to, you know, as staff or employees of the council. You know, I think most councils get a salary and a mobile phone or something like that. But it becomes, that grey area of merging the two becomes a little bit too grey, and I think it brings up new complications about education, about training, and about risk if the councillors put out something. So I would, in terms of a policy, I would purely keep it to internal staff purposes, but you might also want to have a clause in there that dictates that local councillors are elected and are not bound by this social media policy. You know, because some might be members of a political party who have a different social media policy, or they might be, you know, you might have somebody who is a local councillor has a Twitter profile that promotes their business. Now, there are implications if a local councillor is covered by a policy but is also using their Twitter account to promote their own business. And I think that's those sort of complications that are very grey and best steer clear of, in my opinion.
Rory Lawrence, Pickwood Council. We've just finalised a communications policy, just updated a recent policy review, and we actually put a comment in there regarding councillors' use of social media. It was basically that they're an active and well recognised person within the local community, and people know that they represent their local council. So we made a comment in our policy that they're quite happy to have a social media presence, as long as when they're expressing a view which is not that of the council in general, that they actually say that they're not representing the views of the council, that there is their own personal comment. Because we don't want them going out putting their own personal view in the community and people thinking that represents the view of the council.
Yeah, that's completely spot on. Yeah, completely agree. It's a good way of managing it. I think that's it for the questions, so thanks very much for having me.